This is an interview with the superintendent of schools in LA where this happened. So officers with the Department of Homeland Security recently attempted to enter elementary schools in Los Angeles, but were not allowed in. Agents claim to have been conducting a welfare check, not an immigration enforcement action. School administrators say DHS lied about having permission from caregivers to speak to these students. The agency denies its officers lied. Laura Barron Lopez reports. Now, this is an interview going back and forth. So the move by immigration officers at the second largest school district in the country has sparked new fears for families, teachers, and administrators. It comes after President Trump rescinded a long-standing policy designating schools, churches, and hospitals as protected areas from immigration enforcement actions. I'm joined now by the Superintendent of Los Angeles Unified School District, Alberto Carvalho. Superintendent, thank you very much for joining News Hour. Okay, so he says, thanks for the opportunity. All I can tell you is that teams of 4 agents showed up at 2 different schools 2 hours apart. We, in fact, believe that these 8 individuals belong to the same team. They, after being asked by the principals to provide some degree of identification, they did present credentials that identify them as agents of the Department of Homeland Security, which they went to great lengths to actually explain to the principals that they were not with ICE. The problem began when, number 1, they failed to produce a judicial warrant, which we require for any type of access to staff or students in our schools. And secondly, they blatantly lied because they conveyed to the principals that they had obtained permission from these children's parents or guardians to have access to them in school. Based on the statement that was released by the Department of Homeland Security after the incident, they actually conveyed that they were there to conduct wellness checks on these children on the basis of their undocumented and unaccompanied status, which contradicts the fact that presumably they would have obtained permission from the parents of these children, which the parents and guardians absolutely denied. What happened to the worst, right? He still keeps saying that. We're getting out the worst of the worst. They're going to schools to find children. And that's concerning, considering the list, the Epstein list. We don't want them around children anymore. Save the children, my ass. These people say save the children and found these organizations to give them access to children. We know because they keep getting arrested and going to prison for it. Ugh. Okay, as you said, the interviewer says, as you said, according to Homeland Security, these were not ICE agents. They were criminal investigators through the Homeland Security Department, and they were conducting wellness checks that they say have nothing to do with immigration enforcement. But what's your understanding? And is it typical for wellness checks to be conducted this way at an elementary school? And he says, 3 quick points. Number 1, there was no evidence that this type of action has been taken in any schools across the country. Secondly, I think that we could all accept that one of the safest places for our kids in the country happens to be in the schoolhouse. Well, the guns. Thirdly, we're well aware of the fact that a number of federal agencies, not just ICE, have agreed to collaborate with ICE for the purpose of immigration actions in our communities. And then it should also be noted to these individuals that we follow very specific legal parameters. Number 1, the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution of our nation, which extends as a right free public education to every kid, regardless of immigration status. Secondly, FERPA, which is a federal law that protects the confidentiality and privacy rights of students and their families, meaning we cannot provide any type of information about these children without a judicial warrant. And then the most important one for us as educators, in loco parentis, which means in the absence of a parent. Myself, as a superintendent, a teacher, a principal, has the responsibility to stand in as that parent in the protection of that child. That absolutely limits our ability to provide any information or access to any entity, federal or not. And she says, so you have tens of thousands of immigrant students, including thousands of undocumented students. What are you hearing from teachers, students, and their parents at this time? Well, from teachers, righteous indignation. From the parents, fear. They are conveying to us directly. I have spoken with some of the parents, some of the members of the community. They feel intimidated. They feel fear. They feel anxiety. And from the students, even though they are not conveying that information to me, particularly elementary age kids, I have had conversations with secondary age students who are telling me that at the dinner table, they're hearing their parents speak about the fact that one of them may be a citizen of this nation and the other is not. And they fear family separation based on what they hear. They do not know what tomorrow will be like. And she says, so you talked about the fear that parents are experiencing. Is this impacting the ability of educators to teach students at your schools? And are you also seeing some students not attend school out of fear? And he says, well, so what we've detected in schools where these types of incidents have happened, as was the case in 2 elementary schools or schools located in areas where it was known that immigration actions took place close to the schools, we have seen some degree of decline in the average daily attendance. He said, but amazingly, the community believes that the district is doing all it can to protect students and to protect families. So we have not necessarily seen a significant decline in the average daily attendance for the entire district. And she says, Superintendent, this week President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, said that he, quote, absolutely, end quote, wants to prosecute sanctuary city leaders who harbor or shield undocumented immigrants and possibly send those officials to prison. Homan said, quote, it's coming, close quote. So what's your response to this? And what are you advising others across the district? And he says, look, as I've said time and time again, I certainly, not that I want to, but I would welcome first a consequence to self rather than a consequence of the children that we serve. We are following the law. We're following the law of the state of California. We're following the board's policy. States' rights, states' rights. And we are, to the best of our ability, complying with federal guidelines, whether they are constitutional in nature or whether they deal directly with the confidentiality of privacy rights of children and their families. So we believe we are on the right side of the law and certainly on the right side of history. And she says, I want to ask you about your speech last week where you referred to your personal history. You said beyond your professional responsibility, you had a, quote, moral responsibility to protect these students, close quote. And he said, well, I would be the biggest hypocrite in the world, regardless of my position today, if I did not fight for those who find themselves in the same predicament I faced over 40 years ago when I arrived in this country at the age of 17 as an undocumented immigrant. Education made me and saved me. And she said, Superintendent, what compelled you to say that? And he said, I want people across our communities and across our country to take a look at what an immigrant looks like and take a look at what education in this great land of ours can do for kids who, despite their circumstances, mature into adults that do right and do good by this country. I understand that laws are to be followed, but I also must urge people to dig deep inside their hearts and their minds and search and find some degree of decency, justice, and compassion for children who, through no mistake of their own, find themselves in the crosshairs of policies that are punitive to them. That's the end of the interview. This is really disturbing, guys. And they shouldn't have their hands on children. I don't buy it anymore. I don't believe anything they say. They didn't believe in free speech. We found that out. They don't believe in free speech. They don't believe in this Constitution in general, writ large. Okay? He keeps defying court orders. He's threatening judges, intimidating judges. This is bullshit. This is what authoritarianism looks like. This is what fascism looks like. We are seeing it up close and personal. I'm so sorry that we had to see this day in the United States of America. But all I have to say to the GOP and this administration is keep your fucking filthy hands off the kids that you always claim to protect. But we know you don't, because a bunch of you are involved in it with Epstein. A bunch of you. Tons of you billionaires. Musk was his friend. Bannon was his friend. Peter Thiel had business connections with him that we know of. Maybe he brought in some little boys for him. I'm sick of this shit. They're all guilty. Release those fucking files. And we know MAGA Mike, that he closed the government down rather than swear in the new representative from Arizona, because she was going to sign on to be the 218th signature on that discharge petition that goes right over MAGA Mike's head. So this is the biggest cover-up that we've ever seen in our lifetimes, is the Epstein files. And now the Department of Homeland Security is going around trying to get kids that they're disappearing. They're trying to deport them to places where they probably have people that are there to pick them up. Yeah. I don't want these kids trafficked. They need to keep their hands off them. The kids are safe where they are. They have illegal guardians. That's it. That's all, in my opinion.